a warm welcome to this first conversation of United Leaders Europe. I'm Antoinette Weibel, professor of the University of St. Gallen and co-founder of the Good Leadership Society. It's wonderful to see so many trusted leaders, builders and innovators in this group. Our session today has three simple aims. First, to inspire and mobilize us around Europe's decisive decade. Second, to clarify what we are building together with ULE. And third, to invite you directly into shaping it with us. Today, Marcello and Otti will introduce their vision, but the real story begins with what we do together from here on. So, Marcello, to understand this decisive decade, in 1 minute, why Europe, why now?
Well, thank you, Antoinette. Delighted to be here. You know, history rarely offers a second chance. And Europe is standing at the eye of a perfect storm with climate, war, tech disruption, democratic divides, and erosion of democracy. We can no longer really outsource our future to Washington or Beijing, or also rely on Brussels alone to fix things. At the same time, the opportunities abound. As I see, there is a real new renaissance that is emerging, a new civic economy. Part of my work is to have been seeing and touching all these people, entrepreneurs, civic leaders, educators, scientists, many from next generations, I must say, people in their 20s and 30s, already building solutions, but too often they're isolated, they're unsupported, there's no real structure behind them. So why Europe, why now? Because it is a decisive decade. As we know, we've been saying it for 5 or 6 years, and I think there is a danger of Europe becoming irrelevant in this wider global world, and the opportunity of reinventing Europe in a much more civic and mutuality way, a values-based federation, as we call it. That is why.
Oh, wonderful. And to understand where ULE comes in, Otti, what problem do we solve that others do not?
It's a great question. And I think, as Marcello already said, the problem really isn't the lack of ideas or initiative. Europe has plenty. Everywhere you look these days, people are building solutions and new networks and movements. But I think the real challenge lies in three gaps. The first is fragmentation. Too many good efforts just get stuck in silos: business versus politics, the North versus the South, the innovators cut off from the institutions. And when something does succeed, it very often gets captured either by vested interests or buried under levels of bureaucracy. And the second, as Marcello already pointed out, is isolation. It's almost impossible for any single actor today in this very complex world to shift the system. And what is missing is really some sort of platform, a trust-based community of what I would almost call pragmatic idealists that work together. And third, I also believe there's sometimes a lack of competence. Even when actors are very well-meaning, they lack the agency or the capability to connect across all these different parts of the system, which is very difficult and requires different types of skills. And that's, I think, where ULE could come in. We're not adding yet another initiative to the pile. We want to build a middle-out engine that links courageous leaders across borders, tests new solutions in real places, and turns those results into political institutional momentum. Not a lobby, not a party, but a force that, as Marcello points out, makes that renaissance, the renewal possible.
So if I just want to situate ourselves in ULE, Marcello, I want to start with you. Why for good leaders, and how do they support the new movement?
It actually started with me wanting to be a kind of civic leader, all my work in life. And 3 years ago, we created this community born from a very simple conviction. The leadership today has too often become about status and image, where it really ought to be about service and stewardship. This is my old interpretation of Aristotle that always with me. And in the past 2 decades, I worked across, impact entrepreneurship, investment, philanthropy, helping to seed the B Corp movement in Europe with now 2,500 companies and more by law, the benefit corporations. And I've seen this all the time, extraordinary leaders everywhere. And we want to give them a community, a space where they come together and put purpose before ego. And that's why ULE so much matters. It's a sort of natural step.
And Otti, why us? Global Society for Good Leadership.
Building on Marcello, I think we absolutely share the spirit, and our focus has been on the scaling. And my own background is, of course, in leading large-scale, complex transformations in global businesses. And Antoinette brings decades of academic research in both trust and management. And together, we founded this Global Society for Good Leadership to connect not only practice and theory, but also the endeavors by many individuals and companies to create systemic change across all the levels of the system. And over the years, from many conversations, we've shown that this really requires a connected effort across the micro level, where leaders and teams build skills and courage, the meso level, where institutions are designed with a purpose at the core, and the macro level, where business interacts with each other, but also with political institutions, economy, and society at large. And I think this is really the foundation of ULE, United Leaders Europe. It takes what we have learned across our various organizations, for good leaders and the Leadership Society, and applies it to Europe to try to help with this decisive decay, turning leadership and entrepreneurship into a force for societal renewal.
Now, I think this leads us very nicely into understanding better what the ULE solution is really all about. And I give you a little challenge, Otti. Try to define ULE in one sentence for me.
Oh, I think that's looking at the slide, that's not so easy. But perhaps what we could say is that United Leaders Europe is a strategic supra-network. So it's an alliance of leaders, ecosystems, and civic institutions who work together to turn practice into prototype and prototype into policy. We really want to create a platform where the real builders come together to co-create Europe's future across business, civil society, and politics. And that's what we mean by the model is really the middle, from the middle out. We empower leaders who are already building at the center of transformation, be that kind of business entrepreneurs, the civic innovators, or people inside public institutions, so that their work doesn't remain isolated, doesn't remain fragmented, but gets amplified and replicated and ultimately institutionalized at the European level.
Okay, so that was almost one sentence, but I think I'm a little bit more smarter now. But Marcello, I still want to go a little bit deeper, because for me it's important to understand what's different, how is it different from a think tank, from a party, or even the B Corps, what we're trying to build here.
I think ULE is different in three ways. First is that it's not ideological. We are not creating a political party, but a network that wants to anchor transformation in real practice. Real practice is a supra-network of builders. So we are not just intellectual, it's the second point. Think tanks write reports, we design and test interventions. So we really actually in practice intervention with leaders, entrepreneurs, builders in the ecosystems, from energy to tech to food to other, driving sectors of the economy of society. I always talk about this sort of the civic sector, the sort of things that people need to live a good life, So that's for me the core of the economy, the real economy. And unlike even B Corps or certification movements, it's not about giving a certification to anyone. It's about the collective, the systemic transformation is connecting companies, social entrepreneurs, educational institutions for this wider good, creating a shared infrastructure, a pooled legitimacy, and much more coordinated action.
Okay, great. So if we go to the theory of change, so how do we bring the change into the world? Maybe Otti, you can walk us through the 5 services in 60 seconds.
The first thing we believe is important is this systemic leadership development. So we want to equip leaders with the skills, the alliances, and the legitimacy that is required to lead this connected innovation. And there's a lot about system convening that is required, which I think goes beyond traditional leadership development. Secondly, we talk about cross-border ecosystem alliances. So again, the idea that we bring different countries together, languages, ways of working, etc. So we convene these actors across countries and industries, to Marcello's point, to pilot new models in what be it, energy or food or technology. Third, I think this policy interface is a really important component where we translate the learnings from the bottom up or the middle ecosystem into new frameworks, ideally that change the context. Fourth, another important pillar, I think, is a narrative infrastructure. It's really creating a compelling European narrative. Many people have lost this faith in Europe, but not as a top-down utopia, much more as something that is co-created from the stories on the ground that reframe crises as opportunities, but also together can shift this famous Overton window as to what is imaginable and possible in public discourse. And finally, all of this has to come together in some sort of architecture so that we know what opportunities we have to influence political decision making, where the competencies and resources are across these different countries. So we strategically optimize all our efforts to make it more than the sum of the parts.
Maybe Marcello, you could give me a good example of an ecosystem where that becomes alive, what we just heard from Otti.
Yeah, sure. I think that, in these days and age, obviously we talk about data, intelligence, AI, and the issue of Europe's digital sovereignty is really critical. So here, I think that the clear direction is how can we, through a mix of legislation, regulation to some extent, but also models and examples from the IT and tech companies in Europe move towards this sovereignty alliance. We call it a European Tech Sovereignty Alliance, a federation. And here we have, again, what we said earlier, is a lot of innovations going on, but it's not being scaled or pooled together into an infrastructure. So this is what we are doing through a policy interface, connecting these tech companies in Europe that are already moving towards a sovereignty with Brussels and with the EU institutions, and actually feeding this into procurement, data sharing agreements, and even a European level digital stack. So this is really how local initiatives can come and then become, through the work that we do, focused and work with the European institutions.
Yeah, wonderful. Makes it very clear to me. I want to go to another point, and you were already mentioning that it's the supra-network, and I think that's really important. But can you maybe explain again what it means to be a supra-network?
Jean Monnet talked about supranationalism. This was actually the invention of the EU, is to go above the issues of national interest and create common interest. And that was, of course, nation states. And now, given that that is our premise, we've become a society of networks, a society of organizations, is how can we think beyond the self-interest, the individual entity, and create the super network, a sort of federation of movements, of networks working for the new Europe. And I think that it's a simple concept, but it's actually elevating, which again in the Jean Monnet always said, if you have a problem, make it bigger, think above the problem. So it's how do we think, not only think, but work across these networks, many of which we know we've been involved and some of which we've been actually leading over the years. So the super network is really about unity without uniformity and strength without centralization. And I must say, yes, Europe has challenges, but we have succeeded in Europe in the last 70 years or whatever, 69 years, 68 years, to actually show that the supranationalism can work. And we want to make the super network also work in the spirit of the European Union and Europe.
So I hear unity without uniformity. I hear autonomy and co-ownership. Otti, what happens when other networks join in? So can we look at this step by step?
So we needed to develop some sort of onboarding pathway, and we thought it could start with really a ceremonial moment where the partnership networks subscribe to a shared charter of values or a constitution or something like that. So we share certain values that we all agree upon. And then comes some sort of declaration of intent where we map the goals of each network to the goals of ULE and identify genuine overlaps. So it's, I think, really important that there's a match of interests. And it's also what Jean Monnet always pointed out. And thereafter, we get practical. So we get access to a shared data room, for example, where we have a repository of our shared templates, the intelligence, the membership networks, the tools, etc. So we really start to build things together. And I could envisage technically that we connect through some APIs. So I think technology and IT become really empowering in this sense. But also we need a shared level of governance where we agree how information flows, how we do decisions together, and perhaps even how we pool capital or talent or even business models on some sort of shared infrastructure to create a common backbone across all the networks. And finally, there's the idea that participating networks gain a seat on this new leadership or action council for Europe, which will become the forum that prioritizes and coordinates everything that the network does in a participatory and deliberatory way. So again, the idea, no network loses their identity, but they all gain this co-ownership in a larger project, turning the fragmentation into genuine federation.
Now, if I want to make that even more practical and look at the membership journal, Marcello, you always said that we need to leverage innovative entrepreneurs. Can you take us inside this membership journey and tell us what actually happens when someone joins ULE?
Yes, of course. That's going down to the practical level, the real level where the work happens. So take the example of Ines. It's a B Corp entrepreneur in the food sector from Emilia-Romagna in Italy. When she joins ULE, the first step is activation. She's welcomed into a curated circle of peers where she can be fully open about her challenges and ambitions. And very quickly, she's invited by others into a cross-border ecosystem lab. For her, that means collaborating with others on the sustainable food chains. And ULE amplifies her work, giving her narrative support, visibility, connections to capital, and the peer network. And we have seen that in the B Corp space, companies work with each other, they create alliances, partnerships. So with the right kind of choice of members, it can be magical. And crucially, she's not just networking. She'll be contributing to prototypes that can scale into policy. And for example, her work on procurement, regenerative procurement, could inform the EU frameworks, which is again something we already did in part with the B Corp movement, and actually working with Manuel Faber and the IISB and the CSRD, etc. B Corp movement was very influential there. Within months, Ines could move from being a local entrepreneur in Emilia-Romagna to actually becoming a European change agent without sacrificing her business focus and her business, of course. She will get access to policy network, which entrepreneurs often lack. Also, she would also know much more what the Green Deal is and other European policies. And as I will say later on, we have a lot of companies in our space that have received funding from the European Investment Bank, which is actually working towards creating this new economy for Europe. So that is the journey for her, from a trusted community into an ecosystem prototype and eventually systemic influence within the system that we're building.
Yeah, that makes it very plastic, but I'm also interested what's the overall membership offer for ULE and who beyond entrepreneurs should join. Otti, can you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So building on what Marcello just explained, the network would be open to entrepreneurs like Ines, but also civic innovators, academics, and policymakers. So everybody who can find themselves in one of the service areas or in that bringing everybody together and everything together at the level of the hub. And I think more generally speaking, anyone who feels isolated or blocked by the current fragmentation and cares about Europe and wants to help make Europe better. And in a nutshell, the current idea of the membership offer is fourfold. So first, as Marcello said, this kind of trusted circle, carefully curated communities where integrity is the norm and people can really talk with each other about problems they face collectively. Second, this idea of amplification. So pooled infrastructure that scales impact, which could be shared governance templates, shared narratives, but also things like shared talent. So why not have development journeys for leaders that go from one company to another, or one ecosystem to another, or from business to policy making, etc. And I'm also really thinking about pooled IP. So we could think about the notion of commons, equally in the technology space. And of course, the policy interface. We need to find a way to connect our work to Brussels without being captured or forced into traditional lobbying. And as Marcello pointed out, I think this is really an area where many entrepreneurs who are well-meaning and want to help are struggling. But we need to really connect policy and entrepreneurs based on problems that practical problems that require solutions, not just going out there and trying to influence.
And personally, of course, I would also like to invite the university leaders, but that's just a side thing. I mean, this will take architecture and a roadmap. And Otti, can you lead us to the roadmap for the next 6 to 12 months?
Marcello and I always joke this is a 10-year project. It's really, in my mind, a different way of doing Europe, an access pathway for people who feel strongly about Europe to become part of the future of Europe. It's almost like the way that we want to interact with each other should symbolically be the way we see Europe. The relationships we create inside this network is what we believe Europe is about. It's not leaving anyone behind. It's creating a model that is different from the American one, which is more about individual success and domination, the Chinese one, which is more about control by the state. No, we want one that is potentially more messy, but it's also more beautiful, because we are creating opportunities for individuals to shine in service of the shining of all. I think that is European. But as you say, that's very complex. And looking at this slide, we put some potential milestones onto the chart. I think, in just not going into any level of detail, which is to come, and also everybody should have an opportunity to contribute. There's a necessity to set up some sort of anchor, a legal basis, a core team, a governance model that is both stable and transparent. Secondly, we need to test this. So we need to have some pilots in sectors like food and tech or energy, where practical cross-border collaboration can really show that there are early results that policymaking should get interested in. And third, as we said, we need to look at the interface. How can we create that in the way we describe it? Who do we need? And ideally, all of these areas should be led by institutions already in those areas. We don't want to create those ourselves. We want to connect people who are already there. And I think alongside that, we need to think about this synthesis hub. So this kind of intelligent connection in the middle. How do we do that? We need intelligence from the members, from the ecosystems, but also from the policymakers to understand when the windows for change are open. And we need to understand how we can really focus on the most important actions that we can collaborate upon to really make a difference.
Yeah, so I feel already very inspired. What we also want to have a look at is how we will run the LinkedIn group in the next months. How can people join topic hubs? What's the builders hour? And what do we expect in terms of a weekly rhythm? So Otti, can you tell us a little bit about that?
The LinkedIn group is meant to be a focus group. So it's not necessarily a group of members. It's a group of people interested and who are willing to put some time in shaping and creating this new initiative. And there's a very inconvenient truth that we cannot ignore, which is focus groups or LinkedIn groups never really work. So we were thinking how to do something which could, at least for the effort that people are willing to bring, use that effort very strategically in a very focused way. So in a nutshell, we're going to try to keep it very simple and very structured. So these topic hubs will be organized around 10 hashtags, and each one is linked to either the 5 service areas, as we called them at the beginning. So that's leadership, ecosystems, policy, narrative, and the overarching architecture, or some critical areas that we need to have a discussion about in terms of setting up the network itself. So we've got funding, for example, we've got marketing and the website, and we got infrastructure. IT will become very, very critical. So please have a look at these 10 areas and see where you might be willing to spend some of your energy, time, or just giving some advice. And then, as you mentioned, the idea is that we will have a weekly rhythm. So we're going to take these 10 different hashtags, and we introduce one of them every week to have a focused conversation. But we will also have the Builders Hour. So every Thursday at 12 o'clock, so noon Central European time, we're going to open the call for 1 hour for people to just come on and share their views, point us to existing networks, and introduce some other people that might have specialist expertise in that areas, get to know each other and deepen the collaboration. And throughout the week, hopefully, if we can find some people who are willing to be hosts for those specific topics, we will try to create a little bit of an open conversation inside the group as well. And of course, we're going to try to avoid any noise as much as possible. So we're inviting people to stay on the topic, or at least not to kind of self-promote with other things that are better posted outside of this group. So I think that's the key idea.
And what can people do if they have questions?
I think we called it founders briefing. So people can use that hashtag just to add something onto our own work stack where we need to do some work or answer some questions. But most importantly, we will also have a living FAQ document, which is going to be in the chat, and hopefully we can post it at the top of the chat, where people can see any answers, contribute to the answers, or pose new questions that we will then over time just add on, and potentially also distribute across the hashtag areas. In the moment that we have some topic leads, they should also be able to just use the specific hashtag, and the topic lead takes over the conversation.
Okay, yeah, that sounds very useful. Marcello, I want you to give us 3 things that everyone should do in the next 7 days.
Yeah, so 3 things. The first one is to join one topic hub and post your personal ask and offer. So one thing you need, one thing you can contribute. And this is, by the way, very successfully done by a network called Sandbox. These are young entrepreneurs. They do it every week. Ask and offer, very simple. We will circulate the document that makes it easy. Secondly, to volunteer for a micro role. It could be a small role, moderating one thread, collecting one story, or spotting a policy window. But it obviously signals that you are engaged with us. Third is to invite 2 aligned peers, so not 20 or 100, just 2 people whom you really believe in Europe and who believe in the power and the opportunity that is facing us as builders working for Europe. And then, of course, you please block your calendar for our Thursday Europe in Action call. And I think if each one of us does these 3 things, we will then move, as Otti says, from a LinkedIn group to a breathing movement.
Well, yes, it's very vibrant already. So thank you, Marcello and Otti. And thank to everyone who is giving his time or her time and attention today. What you've heard is just the beginning. Our United Leaders is a circle of trust built for people like you, people who don't just want to talk about Europe, but really want to shape it. Let me leave you with 3 takeaways. First of all, this is the decisive decade. Europe faces a perfect storm of challenges, but also a civic awakening. ULE is a supra-network of builders. This is designed to amplify your work, connect ecosystems, and translate prototypes into institutions. And you're not an observer, you're a co-owner. This will only succeed if you engage. So here's the invitation. In the next 7 days, pick up a topic hub and post your ask and offer. Volunteer for one micro role, however small, to keep the energy alive. And invite 2 aligned peers who belong to this circle. Finally, block your calendar. Every Thursday at 12 o'clock CET, we gather for the Builders Hour. That's where the conversation continues and where the network takes shape, week by week. Thank you again for being here. Europe is not built from the top down, it's rebuilt from the middle out. And together we can make that real.